The state justice system is often characterized as a stalled machine, one that is slow, backlogged, and paralyzed by its own bureaucracy. The common political assumption is that clearing this jam requires more resources. Politicians typically argue for hiring more judges, building more courtrooms, and increasing taxpayer funding. This data block represents all active court cases nationally. While we often focus on criminal law, those proceedings account for only 22% of the docket. The remaining 78% consists entirely of private civil disputes. These are private disagreements over things like contracts, property lines, and debt. They are not matters of public safety, but private arguments over assets. Crucially, these civil lawsuits have no statute of limitations and can exist on the docket indefinitely. Without a time limit forcing a conclusion, a single disagreement can remain active in the system for decades, requiring constant attention from state resources. The backlog is not a lack of funding, it is a structural bug. The state's judicial machinery is being paralyzed because it is forced to indefinitely process the private arguments of its citizens. To understand why these cases drag on, we have to look at the financial engine driving the legal profession. Under the current system, lawyers are often compensated per court appearance or hearing. They are paid for the act of participating, regardless of whether the case moves toward a resolution. This creates a perverse incentive. Every time a case loops back for another hearing, money transfers to the lawyer. The system financially rewards the legal profession for keeping a lawsuit alive as long as possible. This leads to the tactical use of irrelevant motions and procedural delays. Lawyers are incentivized to bombard the court with filings, specifically to trigger more billable appearances. The public pays for the infrastructure required for these delays. Taxpayers fund the judges, clerks, and buildings used to host these private disagreements. This dynamic drains the public budget, leaving fewer resources for the actual criminal justice system. The current system is not broken. It is optimized to generate income through infinite delay at the public's expense. Fixing the machine requires altering the financial physics of the courtroom, not expanding the state's overhead. The first architectural patch involves this foundational layer, the basic courts. All first-instance civil lawsuits are routed out of the state system and into newly created private civil courts. These are private partnerships, but they function as the base layer of the state's legal framework. They operate under strict, unified tariffs that prevent arbitrary overcharging. This shift introduces a loser pays mechanism. The state taxpayer is no longer responsible for the judge's salary or the courtroom's operational costs in these disputes. Instead, the financial cost of the private judge's fee is transferred entirely to the party that loses the lawsuit. By privatizing the first instance, the financial burden of a private argument moves from the taxpayer to the litigants themselves. But if a party loses in private court, what stops them from simply appealing to the state system and clogging it up anyway? An exponential algorithm protects the appeals process. Moving a case up the hierarchy increases financial stakes mathematically. A failed appeal to a higher court doubles the penalty. An appellate loss quadruples it. Pushing to the Supreme Court multiplies the penalty by 8. This algorithm weaponizes financial risk. A frivolous appeal is no longer a low-cost delay tactic. It is a potential economic death sentence for the litigant. To maintain accuracy, the system also places negative feedback loops on the legal professionals. If a private judge's ruling is overturned by a higher state court, that private court receives no payment for the case. To avoid months of unpaid labor, private judges are forced to write detailed, legally sound verdicts that are difficult for higher courts to dismiss. Lawyers face similar pressure. If they advise an appeal and the initial ruling is confirmed, the lawyer's fee is halved or eliminated entirely. By prohibiting non-refundable advance payments, the system forces lawyers to work on the merits. They only earn a payout if they win. Both judges and lawyers are now structurally aligned to favor speed and accuracy over duration. This architecture forces a reversal in how the legal profession operates. Lawyers must now calculate the expected value of every case. If a client has a weak claim, the risk of loss becomes a mathematical liability. The exponential multipliers destroy the incentive to take weak cases to trial. When the probability of a zero payout or a massive penalty is factored in, the expected value for a frivolous lawsuit crashes to zero. Faced with the risk of unpaid labor and financially ruined clients, lawyers change their behavior. attorneys begin to scrutinize evidence more strictly up front. They explicitly refuse to file lawsuits that lack clear proof or pursue appeals that have little chance of success. Law becomes a calculation of evidence rather than a contest of endurance. This leaves the question of where these rejected or unwinnable civil disputes go. To secure a guaranteed, faster resolution without the risk of the courtroom multipliers, lawyers will push their clients toward out-of-court settlements. Mediation becomes the primary venue for civil dispute resolution. Because the financial risk of a trial is now so high, both parties are incentivized to settle early. As new filings are diverted to private courts and existing cases are pushed toward settlement to trigger payouts, the 78% civil load begins to clear from the grid. The remaining state docket, focused on criminal and constitutional law, is now free to process cases within weeks rather than years. This schematic illustrates the final macro result. The judicial branch operates unburdened, achieving this systemic shift without hiring more state judges or increasing the public budget. Justice delayed is justice denied. But by engineering the right financial feedback loops, a society can force a broken system to cure itself.